Hey everyone, Radical Dreamer Steve back at you with another video, and today I'm really excited because I'm talking about what might be my favorite video game generation of all time, the 5th generation, PlayStation 1, Nintendo 64, and Sega Saturn. This video is specifically going to talk about the sort of battle between the N64 and the PS1. Before you Saturn fans go too crazy, I love the Saturn. I actually have a little Saturn collection, and I got into it way after the fact. I'm not going to talk about it here today too much because, one, I didn't play it at that time, and two, in the West, the battle really was between the 64 and the PlayStation, so I will touch on the Saturn in a later video. So for me, this is a very special console war because this is really the first generation where I was a conscious video game consumer. The N64 and PlayStation, especially the latter half of that, was basically my later childhood. This is right around the time I was like 8 years old being a teenager, so, war memories. Really war memories. I had a Super Nintendo until about 1998, but I did discover the N64 and the PS1 through friends earlier than that, and that's really where this is going to start. So for me, I was a very ignorant SNES owner, and you can find out all about that in a past video I made on the SNES and the Genesis, but my best friend at the time showed me games like Twisted Metal 1 and Twisted Metal 2 and Mario 64, and my mind was absolutely blown. I mean, here was like legit 3D. Yes, the Super Nintendo and Genesis had some games like, Star Fox and Sonic 3D Blast that were like isometric kind of 3D or very kind of ugly 3D. I don't think Star Fox looks very good at all. Some people absolutely love that game. That's totally fine. But here was like legit 3D, especially with the 64. Almost all 64 games I saw and played were 3D, whereas the PS1 had a lot more 2D and 3D mixed. However, obviously, a lot of developers wanted to take advantage of the new 3D capabilities. But at this time, I was really used to like kiddie platformers as well. And here I am playing Twisted Metal 1 and 2, like literally running over pedestrians and blowing up other cars. And, it just seemed like this was just a whole new world. And as a kid, this is absolutely mind-blowing. I think the biggest thing that I remember, just the awe of the 3D, was Mario 64. Despite the fact that I've never beat this game and I honestly find it super overrated, I know, more hate coming there, I just absolutely loved running around the castle outside, exploring inside the castle, and it was like, oh my god, like I was playing like Yoshi's Island and Super Mario World, absolutely beautiful games on the Super Nintendo, but holy crap, here's like a 3D rendered Mario and this 3D castle you can run around. It's truly open, colorful, crazy, and this game was absolutely mind-blowing in 1996 and 1997. Despite the fact that I'm not its biggest fan, it deserves so much credit for successfully bringing Mario into 3D and just honestly being the best-looking game early on in these consoles' lifespans. And of course, around the time, the N64 had a lot of other good games as well. Honestly, like Wave Race 64, I was playing that the other day, and I was like, wow, for like a game that came out in, I think, like 1996, this game still looks really, really good. Really good. Around this time, also, I was playing other games. My friends had GoldenEye. I played so much GoldenEye. I never owned GoldenEye, actually. I don't think I've ever owned GoldenEye myself, but I played this game so much because, like, all my friends who had a 64 had this game, and it's what everyone wanted to play, like, all the time. And the multiplayer was just amazing. Mario Kart 64 is another one. And so at this time, even though I had a Super Nintendo and a Game Boy, actually, I was playing a ton of Pokemon Red and Blue. I was super addicted to Pokemon Red and Blue for like 3 years. So at this time, it was impossible to avoid the PlayStation and N64. Especially for kids, I think the 64 was huge because a lot of them had the Super Nintendo, and the Sega converts that maybe went to the Saturn or didn't go to the Saturn had to choose between the 64 and the PS1. So I think a lot of them, had fond memories of Mario and Donkey Kong, and the 64 was the obvious choice. Whereas I would think a lot of teenage and adult gamers probably saw the PlayStation as a little bit more mature, a little more like, engaging with third parties, and just probably the console that seemed like the future more so than anything. Ultimately, so what made me choose the PS1? As a Super Nintendo owner, it seemed very likely I would just jump on the N64 bandwagon. That would be the obvious choice, right? SNES owner to 64. However, the thing is that the PlayStation was starting to compete with the 64 in unique ways. the PlayStation wasn't far behind when it came to platformers. I would say that the 64 was overall better. However, the PS1 had Spyro the Dragon. Huge game. And I remember my neighbor having this game and just being absolutely mind-blown, running around just this cute little purple dragon, burning sheep to death. And I was like, whoa, here's kind of a game with an attitude. Mario 64 is cool. It's Mario, but this is kind of like what Sonic should have been in 3D. Now we have Spyro, a little cute dragon with an attitude. It wasn't edgy at all, but, for kids, it felt edgy. And also, the one thing to remember here is that I remember playing the Rumble, running into walls and stuff. The Rumble blew my mind. I almost dropped the controller the first time this happened. I was like, whoa, what is happening here? Why is my controller shaking? And it felt really immersive for the time. And honestly, I think Sony was very, very quick to catch up with Nintendo and very quick to take in third parties and very quick to adapt to new technology. For instance, they had later on, they had a PS1 controller with 2 analog sticks, much closer to what you would see in a controller nowadays. They added the Rumble Pack, I believe, before Nintendo. I should actually learn that, but I think so. Someone feel free to correct me on that. The other thing that really brought me to the PS1 over the N64 was the fact that I had this little tiny demo disc on a Domino's pizza box that contained a demo for Final Fantasy VIII. I had never played Final Fantasy VII. I didn't really know about RPGs at the time. I knew Pokemon and Shining Force 2, and that's it. But I had played Final Fantasy VIII on this demo disc, and I remember the opening cinematic, the mission to Dallet, for anyone who played the game. That just blew my mind. I was like, whoa, dude, this looks like real life. This is like a movie. And you play it, you have these characters, you have turn-based strategy, the characters all have different personalities, there's a whole story, and I was like, dude, this is the next level. Keep in mind that, for you guys that were playing RPGs like Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy VI and stuff, this probably wasn't that amazing to you. But as a kid, this is basically the first RPG I discovered on my own. My friend had put Pokemon and Shining Force in front of me, but here I was in Final Fantasy VIII discovering the first RPG I had discovered on my own that was truly just blowing my mind. And we had played this demo disc, and I knew right at that very moment, that was the exact moment I was like, I am getting a PS1 and not an N64. Why pass on the 64? The 64 was a ton of fun. It was a really, really cool console, and I think graphically, for 3D games, it looked much better than the PS1. But it turns out most of my friends that had 64s pretty much had all multiplayer games. You're talking about Super Smash Bros., GoldenEye, Mario Party, Diddy Kong Racing. These are all incredible local multiplayer games that were great for parties, great for weekend hangouts. And really, that makes the N64, in my opinion, the greatest couch console of all time, even if some of the games don't hold up super well. But the only game that I saw that really made me want it as a one-player experience was Zelda Ocarina of Time. This is admittedly an incredible game. I played a bit of it on my friend's console, and I loved Link's Awakening for the Game Boy. So Ocarina of Time did blow my mind. I tried to play through it as much as I could, but it was going to be another 5-10 years until I beat this game after the fact, sadly. But other than that, there wasn't much on the 64 that felt is going to take me in as a one-player experience. I was getting older, I was heading towards teenage years, and I was starting to get really into RPGs and deeper games. And so for me, Mario 64 and all these multiplayer games were fun, but I could play all those games on my friend's 64s. So I just felt like the PS1, had some of those other games that could match it, like Spyro the Dragon could match Mario 64 to me, even if I was wrong about that opinion. And the PS1 had all these just amazing one-player games that, RPGs basically. So that's going to bring me into the next section, which I'm labeling RPG Heaven. So when I finally got my PS1 really late into the life cycle in 1999, I specifically remember Christmas morning opening up Spyro the Dragon, Cool Borders 3, and some other game I forget. But I remember being really, really disappointed Final Fantasy VIII was not in there. And I remember telling my dad, I gotta get Final Fantasy VIII. And he was like, oh, I talked to the clerk and they told me it's kind of a mature game, it's got a romance story, and kids probably aren't gonna really like it. And I was like, well, nevertheless, I'm getting Final Fantasy VIII because I want that game. I just had that demo burned in my mind. And I got Final Fantasy VIII. I was absolutely terrible at it. But once I started learning it, me and my buddy both started wanting to know what these other RPGs are. Oh, what's Final Fantasy VII? What's Final Fantasy Anthology? Wild Arms? Vandal Hearts? Suikoden 2? Before long, we had discovered just about every RPG that existed on the console. I'm not even joking. I mean, we had obscure stuff like Beyond the Beyond, Rhapsody Musical Adventure, Karsha. We had all of them. And we were in RPG heaven. and we absolutely just adored these games. We played so many of them. Of course, I played some of them after the fact in the PS2 generation. I still occasionally discover something new to this day from these old generations. At the same time, we were actually even going back to playing games like Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy VI and Secret of Mana on the Super Nintendo, games I had totally missed first time around. Zelda Link to the Past, finally going to mention that game. Totally forgot it last video, which is a damn shame because Link to the Past is incredible. And at this time, I discovered my favorite game of all time. Still is, Suikoden 2. I've probably beaten Suikoden 2 10 to 15 times, and I played the original pretty much every time before it because I wanted to transfer that save data. And man, I just have so many fond memories of RPGs like Lunar Games, Grandia, Vandal Hearts 2, Xenogears, and just way more, honestly. And I truly think that part of the PS1's legacy is that it is, in my opinion, the ultimate RPG console. PS2 is pretty close, I think. Maybe could give it a run for its money. But honestly, if you have not played the better PS1 RPGs, I really think you are missing out on some of the very best video games in the genre ever made. And that's not all the PS1 had. It had a lot of other great non-RPGs as well. Metal Gear Solid's one of the best games for the console. Silent Hill, Spyro the Dragon games, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, one of the best games of all time in my opinion right there. Tekken 3, probably the best fighting game in the generation. Mega Man X4. I could keep going on with other games as well. But, despite the fact that the PS1 was very RPG heavy, it had so many good games in other genres. The N64 felt like, there weren't really any RPGs. There's Paper Mario, there's Augur Battle, which I found out later. But it felt like a console that was basically just stuck with multiplayer and some 3D platformers that Rare had put out, which are admittedly really good games. I'm trying Conker's Bad Fur Day for the first time recently. And I'm just really surprised at the attitude for it. Looks really beautiful for the time. Really good voiceovers. And I don't know. I hope to beat that game eventually. It seems really, really cool. And the other thing that a lot of people are probably going to resonate with here is that once you start getting to the age of 8, 9, 10, 12, you're starting to actually understand some of the technology behind the consoles. You're starting to understand what's going on in the industry. And at this time in the late 90s, one of the biggest ways you'd find out about new video games is the magazines. Pretty much every time you'd walk into a GameStop and buy a game, they would try to upsell you a magazine. I explicitly remember this. They'd be like, yeah, buy this new $50 game. You get the Game Informer magazine, 30% off. And you just usually eventually lie and tell them, oh, I already have the magazine. Then they'll leave you alone. Annoying, but the magazine was really cool. I had it for a little while, but my friend had the Game Informer before I did, and I still explicitly remember this would come once a month. He would call me on the phone immediately, be like, dude, new Game Informer's here. Come over, let's check this out. And we would look at the entire magazine, but we would usually immediately scroll to the really small, 2 or 3 pages that were dedicated to RPGs, since those weren't usually the blockbuster games. And also around this time, we never really had money, so we were basically trading in all our games to GameStop, foolish stuff. You might have traded 6 games to get Legend of Dragoon or something. Even though I was pretty late to the console, I still remember the excitement of Suikoden 2, Vandal Hearts 2, Legend of Mana, Legend of Dragoon, Chrono Cross, Final Fantasy IX. A lot of these late PS1 RPGs were just incredible games. And so, yeah, I don't know. There's kind of a charm to this period of just, stupidly trading in games and trying to, count your pennies up enough, trying to get $40 worth of pennies to buy the new game you want, or begging your parents, having to clean the house for 2 weeks to get Suikoden 2. True story there, by the way. The degeneration for both the 64 and the PS1 really managed to go with a bang. In the 2000, you had Perfect Dark released on the N64. You had Zelda Majora's Mask. You had Conker's Bad Fur Day in 2001. So my brother had an N64 at this time, and we played so much Perfect Dark. It's just ridiculous. Probably the number one multiplayer game I played. Tons of Diddy Kong Racing, actually my favorite multiplayer game for that console. And the PS1 had huge games like, Final Fantasy IX, Chrono Cross, Spyro 3, Spider-Man, Tony Hawk 2, huge game. Not one I really like, but huge game for a lot of people. But overall, it felt like the PS1 had won the generation. It definitely felt like the N64 was still the dominant multiplayer console. That was not going to be topped by the PS1, especially since the PS1 only had 2 controller ports, and you had to buy a multi-tap to get 2 extra controllers, whereas the N64 gave you 4 controller ports right out of the box. But yeah, I don't know. I remember my brother playing, Zelda Majora's Mask, Jet Force Gemini, and a couple others, and they looked cool, but I don't know. The PS1 just felt more immersive, wider pool of games, more third-party consoles, and so it really felt like PS1 was the console to own at this time. And I just want to talk about a few of the takeaways I think that sway the generation. To this day, people still argue about which console is better, so obviously a lot of people have fond memories of both of these consoles. I think the PlayStation had a couple aces up its sleeve, though. First was that it was really easy to develop for. The Sega Saturn was notoriously hard to develop for, and the 64 is also, I guess, a little bit more complicated. Plus, they went with cartridges, which I think some companies didn't really see as the future. Couldn't hold as much data, also lower sound quality music. And a lot of the companies hadn't forgotten about the draconian rules that Nintendo forced them into in the 80s and early 90s. Sony was, by comparison, much more friendly to third-party consoles and really wanted to get them on board on the PlayStation. The second thing is that the PS1 controller was much better. It was simple, eventually had 2 analog sticks, and it just felt really nice to hold. I mean, that's still why the PlayStation 5 controller is still designed around that original PlayStation 1 design. N64 controller, by comparison, is really wonky. It didn't really feel comfortable to hold. It's kind of awkward to use the D-pad or the C-sticks, and the analog sticks eventually broke. I mean, good luck finding an N64 controller that still has like a nice working analog stick that hasn't been like replaced or something. And honestly, the final thing I gotta say is that PS1 really took over Sega's mantle as being the cool kids on the block. They didn't really go for family friendly, but they were more inclusive than Sega. Sega had Bernie Stolar, a new CEO, in 1997, and he basically shunned RPGs right around the time that Final Fantasy VII was making it a huge genre. I think the Sony staff realized, RPGs are gonna be huge. Look at how well Final Fantasy VII is selling. It's literally the biggest game for a console. And here you have Bernie Stolar saying we don't want RPGs on the Sega Saturn, pushing working designs out of the company, and just many of the bad decisions they made, which I will cover in another video. But with Nintendo, they have a game like Conker's Bad Fur Day, which is mature. A lot of people kind of said Rare was too kid-friendly, and Conker's Bad Fur Day didn't really sit well with Nintendo. They weren't super happy they made that game. They didn't give it really any sort of publicity, or they didn't put much money into advertising it. And so, the Nintendo 64 felt kind of kiddie and safe, while the PS1 really felt like a giant console that was going to be for the future and more inclusive. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about here is the legacy and the best games. I really think the PS1's legacy is showing the world that Nintendo could be challenged not just by one company, Sega, with the Genesis, but by pretty much any company with enough gall and resources to do it. Sony would do it here, Microsoft's going to join in pretty soon. And they really show, they basically took Nintendo's idea and really went with simplicity in the hardware and went with third-party games and really winning with the software. It didn't matter, the 32-bit versus the 64-bit with the PlayStation N64 ended up being relatively irrelevant to most people. But the N64 really showed us that local multiplayer could carry a console. It's really amazing to me that the 64 is regarded as successful when basically Nintendo and Rare carry that console. And all of the games are basically either multiplayer games or 3D platformers. There's really very little in terms of other genres represented there. Yes, there's some shooting games and stuff. And honestly, the 64 probably had better first-person shooters, for sure. But it really felt like, multiplayer had carried this console, and it was the party console, and that was going to be something that Nintendo would be kind of known for, even to this day. Games like, Super Smash Brothers, games like Mario Party really are geared for families, geared for, people hanging out with each other on the couch, whereas, PlayStation gave you those really robust one-player games. So I'm going to end it by saying some of my favorite games. Starting with the 64, Ocarina of Time, definitely number 1, Diddy Kong Racing, number 2, GoldenEye and Perfect Dark, I absolutely love. They don't hold up well, but the experience and the nostalgia I have for those games is incredible. And Star Fox 64, really, really awesome game. Love that one. I wish that Nintendo would make a Star Fox game like that, because it's probably the best rail shooter I've ever played. PS1, really impossible, but Suikoden 2, definitely my absolute favorite. Metal Gear Solid, incredible game. Final Fantasy IX, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, Lunar 1, Silver Star Story Complete. I don't know. I really can't pick top 5 for PlayStation. I played so many games, and there's so many I could recommend on it, so really hard to pick. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed that. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Really, it's the conversations with you guys that make me want to keep making videos. I don't have the time and resources to make videos every week right now. Maybe eventually that will change. But I really, really try to respond to every one of your comments. I really appreciate it. And some of you guys just teach me some really cool stuff. Some of you guys are really good with the hardware side of things, which is not really my specialty. So, keep up the conversations. And if you guys have channels, you guys have products, please let me know. I'd love to support what you guys are making as well. And definitely feel free to shoot any ideas you'd like me to cover in the future, because I really think all this stuff is about community, really. All right, guys. Hope to catch you guys soon. Game on, and see you guys.